Hello, BookTube. We're continuing with our read-along today of the Thomas Covenant novels of Stephen Donaldson. I'm doing this with a group of other booktubers, and we decided to read one Thomas Covenant novel every month from July until December, covering the first two trilogies. We're ignoring the later books, although several of you have emailed me and said that you would be interested in reading the later books. I've only read them once, and I thought they were weird misfires, every one of them. And I think there might be one that I never actually read. So that's not a bad idea. In 2020, if enough people are interested, we could try that and see, especially now that we'll have all six of the Covenant books under our belt. That I would certainly be interested in doing that. I never see them used, but I'm sure that they're findable. So but one way or another, we're now commenced on the second trilogy. My colleagues are doing one video per book. I'm doing a normal read along, although that's going to change just a bit. So all the read alongs are going to change just a bit. There's all sorts of chaos involved. The things I put you through. But for today, we're reading The Wounded Land, which is book one in the Second Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, in which Thomas Covenant, a man from our world, a leper, and a writer, has been gone from the land, this mystical place that he is occasionally summoned to, for 10 years, 11 years in his life. But time passes much faster in the land than it does on our world, and thousands of years have passed. And when he is summoned to the land again, apparently by Lord Fowl, who is once again grown incredibly strong enough to actually torture reality, all of the events of the previous trilogy are distant, misunderstood mythology by the people who actually live in the land. And the land itself has changed drastically. It's no longer a place of infinite healing. We saw that sort of end in the third book of the last trilogy, but here there is no healing for anybody. It's not just that there's no healing for Thomas Covenant, it's that there's no healing for anybody. And once again, Thomas Covenant is a pivotal figure in this place because he embodies the wild magic. He has a white gold wedding ring that seems to be able to focus something called wild magic that is a sourceless and unpredictable fountain of energy that is potent enough to threaten Lord Fowl and that he himself cannot control. In the earlier trilogy, one of the great characters that Donaldson gives us, Lord Moram, tells Covenant quite simply, you are the wild magic. You are the white gold. It's not just a ring. It can't be transferred to somebody else. That's always struck me as a little bit odd. There's a moment in the Ill-Earth War, the second book in the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, when Covenant gives his ring to a man named Hyle Troy, and who appears to be able to begin to use it. He stopped before he can make any use of it, but for a minute there, it looks like he is going to be able to do it, that it is transferable. I don't know one way or another. One way or another, though, Covenant has returned to the land, and unlike in previous books, he hasn't come alone. He's come with a woman named Lyndon Avery, a doctor named Lyndon Avery, who comes from our world as well, and who they come to the world together. They come to the land together. And although there are plot devices for this, Lyndon Avery has a dark personal history of her own that we will learn more and more about. There's also a very obvious plot exigence involved as well, which is that if you have a stranger coming to the land who knows nothing about it and doesn't believe what they're seeing, they're the perfect dumping ground for exposition. And at a certain point, when you're writing books after this long, 3 long books, and now you've got the 4th one, you have to come up with ways to do that, and they have to be fairly inventive. Covenant has to tell her all about the land. He has to tell her all about the land that he knew, especially since it's obviously gone. The sun itself in this new land is a source of unending terror to the people who live there. The Sunbane is what it's called, apparently controlled from the Clave, which is Revelstone, the seat of the old and benevolent lords in the first trilogy. All the people of the land are terrified and hateful of the Clave, and they hate the Sunbane as well. They can never predict what it will be, and most of the variations on the Sunbane are awful. Pestilence or drought or madness or poison. And Covenant and Lyndon Avery are shoved right into this world without understanding anything about it. Lyndon Avery understands even less than Covenant. He at least knows what is missing, what has been perverted. She doesn't recognize anything, and she's in a worse place for not understanding things than Covenant is, because she has, when she goes to the land, it's revealed that she has the all-encompassing sort of holistic sense of rightness and wrongness, of health and sickness, that everyone in the old land had. No one seems to have it now, except her. Lyndon Avery has the sensibilities of the old land alone, of anyone around her. There's no explanation given in the chapters that we're reading so far as to why that would be true. But she and Covenant have a sort of a spiky relationship with each other. She isn't. It's very odd the way Donaldson writes it. It makes me wonder once again what this book would have been like if it had been a little more daring. I mean, what if this trilogy, or just one book, let's say, took place in our world, in which Lyndon Avery helps Thomas Covenant come to terms with what he has decided is the delusion of the land? What if there are no fantasy elements in it at all? That I would read such a book. But in the chapters that we're reading today, we see three main developments. One is that in the course of the adventures that we have in these chapters, they're fairly bleak adventures. Our heroes are misunderstood, they are hunted, they are on the run, and they are also in danger all the time of the Sunbane itself. During one of those adventures, Covenant is bitten by a venomous snake, and Lyndon Avery, in an echo of an earlier scene from the earlier trilogy where Covenant meets a little girl who has been bitten by a rattlesnake, Lyndon Avery applies a tourniquet, cuts the wound, tries to suck out the venom. Don't do that. In reality, don't do that. And she is very clear on the fact that this is not just venom. It's moral venom. That's how she describes it. There's something much worse here than just venom, just toxin. And we don't know that Covenant is completely free of it. It will have a long shadowed effect on the rest of the books in this series. That's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is something we've seen already. We've seen it happen a couple of times in the first batch of chapters that we read, which is that Covenant's reaction, his relationship with the white gold, seems to be different. It seems to be a far closer and more immediate relationship. He can't do anything with it at will in his right mind, but if it's triggered by something, then he can control it. So, and the land, even this debased and tortured land, is still pretty heavily populated with mystic doohickeys. So it isn't hard to find something that will do that, and Covenant does. And when he does, he seems able to control the results, and the results are awe-inspiring. They're easily more powerful than anything, any magic, any sorcery, certainly any physical force anywhere around him. We never saw anything like that in the first trilogy. Close sometimes. One particular scene where Covenant holds a mystical staff that obviously ignites his power, but most of the time in the first trilogy, he doesn't have the faintest idea how to use the white gold, what it is, how to summon it, anything like that. That appears to be different here. It would have been a fluke if it was just the one time we saw it in the first chapters, but it happens again, and more dramatically here. A couple of times. One time when Covenant very coldly, very consciously says, just do this and do X and Y will result. And he's right. The X calls forth the wild magic, and he is able to control it. The second time, he is delirious with venom. And Lyndon Avery has to sort of trick him into using the wild magic, but when she does, it works just fine. He might be delusional, but he still has control over it. So that's another thing. And then the third thing that happens in the chapters that we're reading today is something we could probably have seen coming. The land is wasted. The land is burnt, desiccated. It's a horrible, twisted, unhealthy version of anything that we knew. The whole point of the land in the first trilogy is that it was a vision of beauty and health. And that is completely perverted here. And you start to wonder if maybe that is connected with why Lord Fowl even wants Covenant in the world, and by extension, why he might want Linden Avery in the world too, knowing what her new abilities will be. It might be that Fowl, who has a knack for perverting things, wants Covenant to poison the land, and that's the reason that he doesn't just have Covenant killed outright, but instead poisoned. But we'll see. We'll get to that. The third thing that happens is that Covenant goes to Andalane. And in the first trilogy of this storyline, Andalane is the heart of the land. It is the most beautiful place in the land. It is rolling, beautiful green hills, under beautiful blue skies, gentle weather, and a place just bursting with health. And Covenant is terrified that the mythology that has grown up around Andalane, the name Andalane, among the people of the land now, 4,000 years after he last set foot in the land, might be right. He's worried that mythology might be right. That mythology calls it the worst place anywhere, a horrible place, someplace that no one in their right mind would go. And when Linden Avery and Thomas Covenant are at the edge of Andalane, she looks in and says, "No, I won't go in. There's a cancer in the middle of this place. It's a horrible, horrible thing." He can't believe it, and he also can't see it. To him, across the river, it looks like a vision of everything that the land used to be. So he goes in and travels for a while in Andalane, and is surrounded by the beauty of the place. He does not see anything of the evil that has been, foreshadowed by other characters. And he meets Hyle Troy. He meets, in the Earth War, Hyle Troy is transformed into a Forestall, a kind of walking spirit guardian of the great forests of the land. Those forests are no more. They are gone. And the Colossus of the Falls that we saw save the day in Power That Preserves has fallen. Hyle Troy, as Carol Wildwood, has withdrawn into Andalane and is using his power to keep it pure. And he meets Covenant, and they talk. And it's a very strange feeling after 100 pages, 200 pages of readers who are coming to this book fresh from that first trilogy. And it kind of harks you back to those earlier characters. We can be brutally honest here. We can be fair. Thomas Covenant seems like a very well fleshed out character here. He seems to have grown. He seems, to my mind, different, deeper, more interesting than the simple a-hole in the first trilogy. But aside from that, there are no yet great characters. Linden Avery might become one, but right now she is overwhelmed, overexhausted, uncomprehending, and Donaldson just doesn't let her up from that. So that we get a much better chance to get to know her as a person in the early chapters of the first section of the book, when we're still in our world, than we ever see so far in the land. And Linden Avery and Thomas Covenant meet a village graveler named Sunder, who is a kind of interesting character in a way, but only one-dimensional. He's entirely a product of the tortured land around him. What I'm trying to say is, when you cross the border into Andalane and you meet Carol Wildwood, you automatically remember Hyle Troy, who was an extremely well-drawn, interesting character in the first trilogy. We haven't had any of those so far in this new trilogy, and then it gets worse. Then it gets worse. That realization gets worse. Because through the magic of Carol Wildwood, Thomas Covenant meets 4 ghosts, 4 spirits. The law of death has been broken. Spirits can come back and talk to the living. They can also affect the living. And those 4 are 4 of the greatest characters from the first trilogy. There's Elena, Covenant's own daughter, and also someone who is a twisted feeling of desire towards him, and who we see break the law of death and bring about the cataclysm at the end of the Earth War. There's Elena. There's Banner, the Bloodguard, once a pure and vow-sustained immortal race of warriors who protected the Lords, and who also, Banner, one of the Bloodguard, was assigned to protect Thomas Covenant, and became as close a thing as a Bloodguard could ever be to a friend. There's also Lord Moram, who I argue is the best character in the first trilogy, and only it takes time. It takes time for Moram to become that character, and that's why I want to hold out hope in case any of you are frustrated with Linden Avery. that this is an author who sometimes need time to flesh out a character, and we should respect that. And Saltheart Foamfollower, the giant, who saves Covenant's life in the Power That Preserves and dies at the end of that book. Covenant meets those four and talks to them just briefly. You want it to be longer, and so does he, and you immediately see why Andalane would have its dark reputation among the people of the land. Carol Wildwood points it out, that thanks to the law of death being broken, people who come to Andalane are visited by their dead. So no wonder they think of it as a place of horror and ghosts and misery. And Carol Wildwood also points out, again, this is all foreshadowing, we don't know a lot of the details. He points out that the shades of the dead that Lyndon Avery would raise in Andalane would be very, very dark. But our four older characters talk to Covenant. They are not allowed to help him. They are not allowed to. There's a lot they can't answer, but they can give him gifts. Lord Moram speaks to him in riddles. Elena speaks to him in riddles. Banner refuses to give him any kind of answers and simply says, "Redeem my people. Their plight is an abomination." We haven't met the Harukai, the people from whom the Bloodguard were drawn. We haven't met them yet in this book. So that's a little bit of a tease, and that's all that Banner says. And Foamfollower, who's laughing, he's his joyous self, he's not a miserable ghost, gives Covenant a gift. A man-shaped being, pure black, called Vain, Vain, who does not speak, and who has a purpose of his own. And Foamfollower says, he won't tell you his purpose, and I can't tell you his purpose, but trust me, it's a good purpose. It's a very good purpose. Vain has one gimmick that he comes along with in the fine print of his owner's manual. He can be commanded just once. And Foamfollower gives him the word of command that will do that. It's Klaatu, Gort, Barada, Niktu. And that's only one. He can only be commanded one time. And Vain doesn't speak. Doesn't say anything, doesn't reveal any of his... He follows Covenant, but he has his own agenda. And is apparently indestructible. When Covenant leaves Andalane and he and Vain go to the nearest village, a villager swings a stone club at Vain's head, and the club shatters, and Vain is not scratched or injured in any way. So, we've got another character here, and this is, again, an echo of the earlier trilogy, especially the Ill-Earth War, where we have the character of Amok, who is also inhuman and who also has a goal and purposes of his own. Vain is along those lines, and you got to credit Donaldson for doing what works. Amok works in the Ill-Earth War. He works as an interesting thing. Vain is obviously interesting. So that is wrapping up our reading for today. Covenant has left Andalane. He has been momentarily rejuvenated by these ghostly friends of his, and now he has to go on with his quest. His quest is to go to Revelstone and find out what's going on there, get answers about the Clave, get answers about the Sunbane, and maybe get answers about Lord Fowl. And it doesn't feel quite... you keep in mind, he had a similar kind of insane goal in The Power That Preserves, but it feels a little more sensible now. If he's got a little more control of the white magic, then it might be possible. But anyway, that's where we're going to end things for today, but we are going to shift up the read along just a little. I don't know how many of you are following along. I'm hoping quite a few. I'm having a ball here. We're going to shift up the read along just a little. Right now, we are at chapter 15, which is called Because You Can See. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to read the rest of the book for next week. So, we are going to go from Because You Can See all the way to chapter 27, Giant Friend. Give you a little hint. If you're reading this for the first time, we'll give you a little hint of something that's coming. The highlight of this trilogy, in my opinion, is coming. So we're gonna finish this book next weekend, and then we're gonna start the next one. So I'll go over this all next weekend as well. But the next book is also 27 chapters plus a long introductory chapter, so basically 28. So basically 7 chapters per week. So we're going to finish this book next weekend. And then we're going to take up The One Tree, which is the second book in the second trilogy. And we're going to read, well, I mean, the first chunk that we would get to ends with the Elohim Fest. But I mean, I'll mull it over the week. This is a much, much more interesting book, just in terms of shot and incident, than The Wounded Land. The Wounded Land is very much the first book in the trilogy, just like Lord Foulsbane was. So you might find this much easier going, and it's a riot of fantasy invention. It really is. I think this second trilogy really shows Donaldson inventing things as opposed to paying homage to things. So I'm thinking that what we might want to do for the last week in October is read half of this book. So that would be all the way to the chapter "Don't Touch Me." But I can mull over that, but one way or another, that is in effect next week. Next week we're going to finish The Wounded Land. So we're going to rock it right to the end there, and I think you're going to find a lot of interesting stuff. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. Those of you who are following along, feel free to tell me what you're making of all of this. But otherwise, I will see you next week when we will wrap up The Wounded Land. Thank you, Book 2.